The world order is fracturing, and the man who usually operates in the deepest shadows of British intelligence has just stepped directly into the spotlight to deliver the most extraordinary and dangerous warning the Kremlin has received this decade. Richard Moore, the chief of MI6, the head of the Secret Intelligence Service, has broken cover to confront Vladimir Putin's global instability doctrine head-on. This is not the measured diplomacy of state departments. This is the raw force of political will aimed directly at Russia's heart. Moore's intervention is designed to send shock waves across every major global capital. His message, sharp and unmistakably clear, cuts through the fog of war. He is laying bare what he calls Russia's chaos strategy, a deliberate state-sponsored doctrine of weaponizing global instability to degrade and ultimately destroy Western unity. This isn't just about the war raging in Eastern Europe. It's about systemic subversion targeting elections, critical infrastructure, and supply lines globally. Moore's accusation is not subtle. Russia is actively, furiously trying to create a world where international norms collapse, leaving Moscow free to dictate terms by sheer brute force. The immediate reaction from the Kremlin was predictable. They fired back instantly, dismissing the MI6 chief's warning as Russophobia and Western propaganda. But the speed and visceral intensity of their denial only underscore how deeply Moore's revelations hit their mark. The stakes are now planetary. This is the diplomatic page turning in real time. We are watching a high-stakes intelligence war transition into an open, strategic confrontation. Moore warns that Russia's current actions threaten to harden into posture, a long-term, irreversible state of hostility that leans dangerously toward escalation. The intelligence community is no longer whispering warnings. They are issuing an unusually blunt threat. The gravity of Moore, a spymaster, stepping into public view to draw a red line cannot be overstated. It signals that Britain, and by extension NATO, believes the threat has reached a level that demands direct public challenge. Moore confirmed that Western capitals are now preparing for what comes next, explicitly citing new and detailed intelligence about Russia's expanded efforts to sabotage undersea data cables and disrupt NATO logistical chains. Actions Moore declared would constitute a profound act of aggression. Crucially, Moore issued a resolute response. The West will not be intimidated. He made clear that any attempt by Russia toward expanding this conflict, be it through kinetic attacks on NATO members or significant infrastructure sabotage, will trigger immediate and severe consequences. The implication is chilling. The UK and its allies have already prepared expanded retaliation options designed to inflict devastating cost on the aggressor, far beyond sanctions. When the head of MI6 makes this public move, it signifies that the threat is now deemed existential. He has exposed the myth that Russia is merely reacting defensively. Moore views Putin's government as the primary engine of global destabilization, using conflict as a tool for political advantage, no matter the human cost. His words serve as a final call to action for NATO nations. Strategic ambiguity is dead. This confrontation is direct. The danger now is that Russia miscalculates. Moore's unprecedented speech is designed to remove all doubt about the seriousness of the Western response. But if Putin ignores this warning, if he chooses to cross that red line, the current proxy war threatens to become something neither Washington nor Moscow can control. The world watches, holding its breath, as the intelligence war explodes into the open. The warning delivered by London is not just rhetoric. It is a precise dissection of what intelligence agencies now call Putin's chaos strategy. This is not the conventional war we study in textbooks. This is something extraordinary and dangerous. It is a multi-layered campaign designed to fracture Western resolve, creating internal instability, so profound that the raw force of political will needed to support Ukraine simply evaporates. The goal is simple, yet sinister: make democratic coherence impossible. This strategy operates in the gray zone, utilizing strategic ambiguity to provide the thinnest veneer of plausible deniability. Russia seeks to win without firing a single conventional shot, weaponizing everything from gas prices to migration flows, from deepfake videos to targeted assassinations on foreign soil. The threat is now unmistakably clear. MI6 Chief Richard Moore was sharp in his assessment, noting that Russia's extensive use of strategic ambiguity has historically shielded them from direct consequence. But that shield is cracking. The digital battlefront, where Russian state-affiliated actors operate, is now generating shock waves that travel far beyond the front lines in Ukraine. Critical infrastructure across Europe is constantly probed. Financial systems are targeted, and the very foundations of democratic stability are tested daily. Each successful cyber operation, each disinformation campaign leans dangerously toward escalation, because attribution is becoming rapid, and the demand for a physical, palpable response is mounting across NATO capitals. The West knows precisely who is pulling the strings, and the diplomatic veil is collapsing. Moscow, predictably, fired back immediately. Dmitry Peskov, speaking for the Kremlin, dismissed the British warning as delusional Russophobia. Yet the speed and fury of the denial only underscore how deeply this exposure cuts. The page is turning in real time, moving from veiled threats to an unusually blunt threat of expanded conflict. When the head of British intelligence steps out of the shadows to name the specific tactics of the adversary, it shifts the confrontation from the intelligence back rooms directly into the public arena. NATO's stance must now harden into posture that is not merely reactive, but resolute. The exposure of the chaos strategy is designed to force a clear choice upon Vladimir Putin: stop the hybrid warfare, or face direct consequences for actions that were once deniable. The red line drawn by Western powers is now centered not just on geographical aggression in Ukraine, but on systemic, non-kinetic attacks designed to collapse internal democratic function within NATO member states. If Russia chooses to double down, if they continue expanding this conflict into the cyber and political realms, Britain and its allies have made it unmistakably clear: they will not be intimidated. They have signaled a resolute response, meaning NATO is furiously reviewing its entire doctrine of escalation management. For decades, the West hesitated to respond in kind to hybrid attacks, fearing unwanted escalation. That hesitation is gone. There is a serious, operational discussion in London and Washington right now regarding expanded retaliation options. Options that may involve kinetic responses to systemic non-kinetic attacks. This is the new, terrifying logic of the conflict. The MI6 warning is the final diplomatic attempt to de-escalate the information space before the retaliation starts moving from deterrence to execution. We are no longer debating whether the West will fight back. We are debating where and how. The exposure of the chaos strategy is intended to short-circuit Moscow's assumption that it can perpetually operate in the gray zone without fear of consequence. That gray zone is now a live-fire zone. This unprecedented confrontation is defining the rules of 21st century warfare. And those rules include the right to respond to a systemic attack on infrastructure with the full force available to the attacked nation, regardless of whether the initial strike was carried out by a missile or malicious code. The stakes have never been higher, and the clock is ticking on Putin's decision to respect that red line. But the MI6 assessment delivered today is an extraordinary and dangerous briefing, outlining not just defensive measures, but mapping the Kremlin's raw force of political will currently deployed against the West. The page turning in real time is accelerating, moving from the shadow war of infrastructure sabotage into the kinetic realities of military mobilization. The intelligence is sharp and the message unmistakably clear. Putin's strategy of chaos is designed to provoke a critical NATO misstep, testing the alliance's response threshold in two volatile theaters. The first, of course, is Ukraine. MI6 detailed specific Russian intent to launch an offensive so devastating it aims to permanently sever the vital military supply lines stretching from Poland and Romania into the conflict zone. This is not about marginal gains on the front lines. This is about fracturing the logistics backbone of the Ukrainian resistance and triggering a humanitarian crisis that forces Western capitulation. Intelligence confirms massive logistical resupply operations, with Russia attempting to harden into posture a readiness profile unseen since the initial invasion phase. This move is calculated to push NATO forces supporting Ukraine into a decision point: either retreat from supporting infrastructure entirely, or engage Russian assets expanding this conflict beyond Ukraine's borders. The second, and perhaps most immediately perilous, theater is the maritime domain. The intelligence dossier reveals a startling picture of aggressive naval posturing, particularly in the Baltic Sea and along the Black Sea shipping routes. Russian naval and air assets have increased their provocative incursions into what NATO considers its critical zones of influence, moving with an audacious disregard for international protocols. MI6 sources confirm that these maneuvers are not defensive drills. They are unusually blunt threat operations aimed at harassing NATO naval units and testing the speed and resolve of the Joint Expeditionary Force. The escalation threatens to become something neither Washington nor Moscow can control. When a destroyer operating under the Russian flag deploys aggressive jamming techniques against a NATO vessel in international waters, or when drone warfare fundamentally shifts the risk calculus for all commercial shipping in the Black Sea, the friction leans dangerously toward escalation. Russia has furiously fired back at NATO's intelligence, labeling the MI6 report as deliberate fear-mongering, yet the actions on the water betray the denials. The pattern of increasingly reckless near collisions and intentional signal interference signals a tactical readiness to engage. This is the point where the hard power dossier necessitates a profound reassessment of Western response strategies. The concept of expanded retaliation options, previously confined to theoretical wargaming scenarios, is now being actively modeled within Allied defense ministries. If Putin believes he can deploy the raw force of political will to sever a NATO supply chain or disrupt critical commercial routes without consequence, he is fundamentally miscalculating the stakes. The MI6 chief's warning serves as the preamble to an ultimatum. The West will not be intimidated by this chaos strategy. The intelligence suggests that any significant infrastructure attack, whether kinetic or cyber, that demonstrably impacts NATO's ability to defend its members or supply its allies will immediately trigger a resolute response. That response would deliver shock waves through the Russian command structure. It means implementing expanded retaliation options that target the very levers of Russian power generation and strategic military assets. This is no longer a matter of sanctions and political isolation. This is the new, dangerous calculus of deterrence, one that demands the utmost vigilance, because the line between defending Ukraine and expanding this conflict into a direct confrontation is vanishing faster than we can track it. But the confrontation is not just happening on the front lines of Eastern Europe. The MI6 chief's warning illuminated an extraordinary and dangerous reality. The true scope of the Kremlin's assault is not conventional. It is a shadow war fought daily, hourly, in the digital arteries of the West. Russia's strategy, as defined by British intelligence, is purely about chaos. They are not seeking victory in the traditional sense. They are seeking systemic collapse from within. The sharp, unmistakably clear intelligence brief laid bare the infrastructure of this attack. This is a global campaign of subversion that targets the very legitimacy of democratic governance. We are talking about sophisticated cyber espionage that targets everything from power grids and water treatment plants to our financial institutions. They are mapping our vulnerabilities, preparing the ground for a digital Pearl Harbor, waiting for the optimal moment to pull the switch on stability. Alongside this, the disinformation factories are working furiously, weaponizing social media, political divisions, and fringe ideology to fracture the foundational cohesion of NATO states. This isn't just interference. It is the calculated subversion of Western democracy and critical infrastructure, powered by the raw force of political will aimed squarely at destabilizing the societies that oppose Putin. The page turning in real time is accelerating. The West has recognized that failing to respond robustly to cyber attacks is interpreted by Moscow as weakness, inviting further, deeper aggression. We see this tension begin to harden into posture. Washington and London have fired back, not just rhetorically, but by announcing new doctrines that treat sophisticated state-sponsored cyber attacks that cause real-world damage as acts of war. This is the critical escalation point, because if a major infrastructure attack, say, crippling the financial sector of a G7 nation, or taking down the communications network for an entire region, is definitively attributed to the GRU or the SVR, the immediate, resolute response from the West may lean dangerously toward escalation that transcends the digital realm entirely. The shock waves would be immediate, hitting markets and defense readiness across the globe, threatening to bring major powers into collision course alignment. This MI6 briefing confirms that this is not a theoretical threat. It is an active, ongoing operational reality that demands immediate defensive and offensive action. The unusually blunt threat issued recently by British defense officials signals that the era of measured, purely defensive cyber responses is over. We have crossed a red line. The message to the Kremlin is this: we will not be intimidated. If you persist in expanding this conflict into our domestic space, if you continue to target our critical infrastructure, our expanded retaliation options are firmly on the table. And those options are no longer confined to digital pushback. They include responses that Moscow might find profoundly uncomfortable, responses designed to impose costs directly on the Russian regime and its security apparatus, not just through crippling sanctions, but through active, disruptive countermeasures that hit their capacity to wage both kinetic and shadow war. The intelligence community is essentially confirming that we are locked in a high-stakes duel, a complex game of digital chicken where the price of miscalculation is catastrophic. When the MI6 chief speaks, Putin listens because the warning is clear. If the chaos strategy results in unacceptable damage to a Western power, the retaliation will be asymmetrical and painful. We are witnessing the terrifying normalization of military confrontation in the fifth domain, and the world is holding its breath to see which superpower blinks first. The threat of escalation is not future tense. It is now. This is the extraordinary and dangerous moment where the West, led by Britain's formidable intelligence apparatus, has decisively fired back. The MI6 chief's warning, delivered with a sharp and unmistakably clear intent, has forced the great powers into a direct digital and economic standoff. This is not mere diplomacy. This is the full mobilization of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance. Washington, London, Canberra, Ottawa, Wellington, huddling in shadow chambers, coordinating a unified defense against what they now officially categorize as a Russian strategy of state-sponsored chaos. The threat laid bare by London is that the current geopolitical tension is rapidly evolving, reaching a point where inaction is suicidal. This challenge is fundamentally altering global security. We are watching history page turning in real time, transitioning from proxy skirmishes to direct strategic confrontation. The West is moving beyond symbolic sanctions. We are seeing the raw force of political will exerted to choke the Kremlin's war machine. Sources confirm that expanded retaliation options are now prominently on the table, targeting not only oligarchs but the fundamental operational capabilities of the Russian state. A crippling financial response designed to create severe shock waves throughout Russia's economy. This is a desperate, unified attempt to force Moscow to recalculate the cost of expanding this conflict. The goal is to make the aggressive stance so economically untenable that the chaos strategy collapses under its own financial weight. Every diplomatic exchange, every intelligence leak, every military deployment is designed to harden into a posture of irreversible, mutual destruction should the cyber attacks cross the ultimate red line. The global digital infrastructure, the very nerves of modern life, is now the primary battleground. Britain is furiously pressing its allies, demanding immediate, drastic improvements in digital resilience. The message is simple: prepare for impact. The infrastructure of finance, energy grids, and public health systems are suddenly exposed and vulnerable to state-level hacking campaigns. The West understands implicitly that Russia's chaos strategy seeks to sow internal distrust, fracturing democratic societies from within. The response must be unified, visible, and overwhelming. The MI6 chief issued an unusually blunt threat. If a critical national infrastructure is breached, the response will transcend the digital domain. This conflict now leans dangerously toward escalation, threatening to become something neither Washington nor Moscow can fully control. The resolute response from the Five Eyes Alliance is a declaration: we will not be intimidated. This is the moment where the rules of engagement are being rewritten, where the threshold for cyber warfare triggers immediate, real-world kinetic consequence. The sheer weight of intelligence cooperation, from the CIA to GCHQ, is focused entirely on preempting the next destructive move. This isn't just about defending Ukraine anymore. It's about the inviolable sovereignty of every NATO nation's digital landscape. If Moscow believes that expanding this conflict into the cyber realm against the West is a cost-free venture, they are dangerously miscalculating. The West is prepared to activate expanded retaliation options that will be swift, severe, and directed at the very core of the Russian state's ability to project power and maintain stability at home. The world waits, gripped by the palpable fear that one wrong keystroke, one misinterpreted signal, could push this digital shadow war past the point of no return. We are standing on the precipice of a new, terrifying geopolitical reality, forced upon us by Putin's deliberate, chilling strategy of chaos. The warning is stark. The mobilization is complete. The countdown is underway. This is not merely a diplomatic squabble. This is an extraordinary and dangerous escalation of statecraft. Putin's chaos strategy, exposed by MI6, is not a temporary measure. It is the fundamental operating system for modern Russian geopolitical ambition. It is designed to keep the West perpetually off balance, to induce paralysis through uncertainty, and to shatter the very foundations of democratic trust. The goal is to make the truth irrelevant. This systematic undermining of trust is why the strategy will not stop. It provides geopolitical gains at minimal overt cost, weaponizing the very freedoms that define Western societies. The response from London and Washington has been equally sharp and delivered with an unmistakably clear message. This ends now. The intelligence community has fired back, not with missiles, but with information, stripping away the veneer of plausible deniability that has shielded the Kremlin for years. But information alone is not enough. To counter this systemic breakdown, nations must mobilize the raw force of political will. The battlefield is no longer confined to Ukraine's borders. It is right here, in our networks, in our banks, and crucially, in our minds. We are watching history's page turning in real time. The geopolitical environment is hardening into a posture of direct confrontation, and every day that passes, the crisis leans dangerously toward escalation. We are witnessing the fusion of digital warfare and conventional coercion, creating shockwaves that threaten global stability. When MI6 warns of Russia expanding this conflict into new domains, they are signaling that the rules of engagement are being rewritten, potentially forcing kinetic responses to purely cyber provocations. This escalation threatens to become something neither Washington nor Moscow can control. Moscow is responding furiously to the exposure. Their state media apparatus is already denying, deflecting, and distorting reality, but their threats behind closed doors are becoming exponentially more worrying. We are hearing reports of an unusually blunt threat from the Kremlin concerning any Western attempts to interfere with their strategic digital infrastructure. That is their red line, and the West must be prepared with a resolute response that shows we will not be intimidated. If Russia believes the West is weak, they will push further, harder, and faster into the gray zone of conflict. Survival in this new information age demands a total paradigm shift. It requires not just defense, but aggressive resilience. Nations must immediately fortify critical infrastructure, power grids, financial networks, communication hubs, not just against a hacker, but against the resources of a hostile state power dedicated to societal collapse. Furthermore, governments must develop expanded retaliation options. Deterrence can no longer rely solely on conventional forces. We need a clearly defined, non-nuclear escalation ladder for the information war, ready to be deployed the moment Russia crosses the threshold of acceptable conflict. This is the only way to counteract the strategic paralysis Putin's chaos seeks to impose. The MI6 chief's warning is the final, undeniable truth. The chaos strategy will not stop because it is working. It will cease only when the raw force of political will from the West imposes costs so devastating that the risk outweighs the reward. Until then, every piece of information you consume, every election you participate in, and every financial transaction you conduct is part of the battlefield. The expansion of this conflict is inevitable unless the West draws a unified, firm, and absolutely unbreakable line. The price of inaction is not merely regional instability, but the complete shattering of the Western alliance and the collapse of the democratic operating system itself. We are past the point of subtle diplomacy. We are staring down a new, permanent state of geopolitical tension, where the very act of knowing the truth is the first and hardest battle.